Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Guidance Corner. My name's Christelle. Now, this week's discussion on self-care is going to be about what are those practices? How do we maintain our self-care? Are the self-care practices that we have in place good for us? What do I mean by that? Sometimes what is a self-care practice for one person might not actually be self-care for another. We're all different. Our bodies are all different. Our emotional states are all different. Our mental states are all different. Is our self-care suitable for where we are now? My self-care practices in my 20s are no longer my self-care practices in my 50s. And to try to do the self-care that I did in my 20s now would actually not be self-care. Now, this is an interesting part of self-care because self-care means what increases our well-being. Self-care contributes to our well-being. Let's look at that. Let's sit with that for a moment. Self-care is what we do or don't do that increases our well-being. Now, in my 20s, I loved to jog. I got to my 30s and I thought I still needed to jog for my well-being. 2 bad knees later, it was not self-care. So self-care evolves over time. It changes as we change. Sometimes when we are in a really difficult place in our life, getting out of bed every day is self-care. It is the best we can do for our mental, emotional, and physical well-being at that point in time. Now, when you're at your best, that doesn't even factor into the equation. It's just something that you do automatically. So I really want to drive that point home. Self-care changes. Self-care evolves. So we need to allow that to happen. And in order for that to happen, we really need to be in a place of mindfulness, in a place where we can observe our actions or we can observe our non-actions and say, that's not self-care anymore, or that's self-care that I really need to implement daily or weekly. So like I said earlier, self-care is something that helps us maintain well-being. So what is well-being? We know it can be mental, physical, emotional. Now, this requires us to look at where are we at. For instance, as I mentioned earlier with my jogging in my 30s, I ended up damaging my knees. So physical activity, when I had one or both knees that were out, it was not self-care. To exercise with bad knees was not self-care. Or not bad knees, injured knees. My knees were injured. So the self-care almost became the opposite. Self-care in that point in time for me was to rest, was to actually look at, I can't run anymore. Physical activity is important, but I can't run anymore. I'm going to have to change that. This is self-care, and this is what mindfulness requires. And this is where going into autopilot, going back into just, this is what I do, this is who I am, doesn't actually help us with self-care. So just because you get up and you do the same thing, which could be a really beneficial practice, a practice that everybody would agree that is so good for us, doing it out of habit with no mindfulness behind it is not self-care, because your energy levels, your emotional levels, your mental levels, what else you've got on. You might have a very busy week. You might have nothing on that week. All those things will impact what self-care means to you in that particular time. So when we're busy, we might be extremely busy at work. We might be extremely busy with the kids one week because they've got a lot of things on. We might be extremely busy because we've got a holiday coming up and we're trying to get everything done before we leave. We might be busy because we're moving. We might be unwell. We might be feeling down, so emotionally unwell, mentally unwell, physically unwell. All these things impact what self-care is. So how can we become aware of this? How do we implement this? We've got this knowledge. We've got this, oh, I've never thought about it like that. Maybe a new perspective, maybe a bit of clarity around what self-care is and how to use it, probably more importantly. So how do we recognize it? How do we make sure that our self-care practices do contribute to our well-being? And that's something that I can't answer for you. I don't know what stage in your life you're in. I don't know at what capacity you're functioning in. I don't know what you're going through, because we can be in perfect health but have a situation in our life that is really draining us. We might be having relationship issues. We might be having work issues. We might be having family issues. So there are so many things that can impact us in our life that we need to take into account when we are deciding that we're going to implement some self-care. But let's look at basic things. Let's look at things that already shed some light on where we might be at and what we can do. So we've talked a little bit already about my knees. And so that's a little bit about our physical state of being and how self-care needs to change just on how we are going physically. Same thing if we're suffering from a cold or any ailment, we need to be kinder to our bodies. So self-care generally looks like slowing down. The same, we can look at emotions. Anxiety is often linked to rushing and trying to make things happen, worrying about things. Anxiety can be created by deadlines. So a self-care for anxiety would be the slowing down, taking things off our plate. Now I'm going to look directly after at depression, because depression is not the opposite, but often with depression, we've slowed down. We might be even at a standstill. So what tiny amount of activity can we do? What one tiny little thing can we do just today that will increase our well-being? Now, with anxiety, that might be, let's take something off our plate. Let's maybe look at that to-do list that is as long as our arm, and let's really honestly take things off that really don't need to be done today. Let's just look at today. Depression's the same. Let's just look at today, and what tiny thing can I do to bring a little bit of movement into my life? Okay, self-care is not telling yourself when you feel down, when you are in a state of depression, and I'm not even talking about clinical depression, just when we're feeling depressed. Telling yourself to go and kayak or run, or it's too much. It's too big a thing. So that's not really self-care. That's almost setting yourself up to fail. So it's almost pretty much the opposite. Whereas when you're at your best and you're vibrant and you're happy, that's probably something that maintains that. But maybe just getting up and brushing your teeth just today might be just that thing that begins to shift that energy. Tomorrow you might actually be able to get up and have a shower. Can you see how these increments in increasing your self-care, they add up. One that might seem insignificant one day can lead to the next day being just that little bit more. And this works on all levels. So this is like our emotional well-being, our mental well-being. Another thing might be we might be struggling with a situation, and the situation might be impacting us on different levels. So what would self-care look like in a situation? So let's say we're struggling at work. What self-care practices can we do to help us, to support us? It might mean, can we drop our hours today for a few days for the week? Can we book a holiday? Can we do something every morning that shifts our focus from work to just being in this present moment where you're not at work yet? So there's a lot of different situations, a lot of self-care practices that we can implement that can help us through situations and help us increase our well-being. And the really important thing here is to understand that self-care is not automated. It is not something to do on autopilot. When you are running at 100%, self-care looks very different than when you are running on 40%. And I want to acknowledge here that when you run at 40%, That's your 100% for the day. That is your maximum capacity that you can function at. So self-care when you're running at 40% doesn't mean doing things to push yourself to reach that 100%. 40 is your 100%. Now, I want to acknowledge here as part of this self-care discussion that sometimes we find ourselves in situations and in emotional or mental states that put us primarily in a survival state, in a state where we are running on empty and we are unable to actually access, or it might feel that we are unable to access anything that could be considered self-care. Now, if you find yourself in that position, if you feel that you don't know what self-care looks like in your situation, in your when you're looking at your well-being, reach out. Look at the free resources that I offer. There'll be a meditation, journaling worksheets, a blog that you can read, and have a look if there's a change of perspective that you need, or maybe just a little bit of clarity. Don't hesitate to reach out to me and book a one-on-one appointment, and we can start to unpack. We can look a little bit deeper. I want to acknowledge here as well that sometimes our state of mind and our state of emotions requires additional support. So when I mentioned earlier about depression, and I said I wasn't even talking about clinical depression, if we are clinically depressed, we may require medications. Okay, so seek help, seek advice. But when we are just feeling depressed, when we are just feeling down, when we are feeling anxious, when something in our life is troubling us, looking at self-care practices can often be a step in the direction to our well-being, to increasing our well-being. So I hope this little discussion on well-being and how to implement it and how to make sure that our well-being is not running on autopilot. Last week's well-being might not look like this week's well-being. Yesterday's well-being practice might not be useful for us today. So the takeaway is, first and foremost, understanding how you are today and looking at the self-care that you need today and working from there. Obviously, there are self-care practices that implemented daily contribute, but still be mindful not to run on autopilot with them, to really look at every day as a new day, a different day. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Take very good care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next discussion. Bye-bye.